having water gives certain groups power, and then people fight to maintain that power or fight to maintain control over that resource. That's what makes me interested in it. Anywhere in the third world, any large city you go to, there are rings of poverty at the edges of the city. And sometimes those rings of poverty house the majority of the population, and they certainly house hundreds of thousands of people. Even in a city like Monterey, with 3 million, there were 300,000 people who did not have water in their homes, people who had no water service coming into their neighborhoods. And if we speak of Mexico City, which has 20 million people, then you're talking about millions of people who don't have water in their homes. When you're in a home and there is no water, okay, there is no tap, where do you start? Water is the foundation of hygiene and health and physical survival. We cannot survive without drinking water. We have to have water. So how do you live without it? And what you find in these poor areas of third world cities is that women have become the managers of water. Okay, women are still carrying out the household tasks that have been assigned to them in terms of the gender assignation of the roles of social reproduction. It's women who do the washing and the cooking and the cleaning and the taking care of children. And those tasks all involve water. And it's a very simple equation. If you have water, it's easier to do those jobs. If you don't have water, those jobs become very arduous. And so what you find in urban areas are women who have to acquire the water to do their jobs. Now, in these neighborhoods where they don't have water in the home, usually you find there are two ways that households get water. One is through what are called public collective stand pipes. These are like what we use as garden faucets, okay? So it's just a pipe coming out of the ground with a faucet, and there'll be one of these for 100 homes or 200 homes. And they're located somewhere on the corner of some neighborhood, in the neighborhood, and the families that share it have to share the water that comes out of it, but the water doesn't come out of it 24 hours a day. It only comes out maybe once a day, maybe once every 2 or 3 days. Maybe it comes out at 3 in the morning. Maybe it doesn't have a regular schedule, and the faucet is left open so that when the water comes out, the nearest neighbor can hear the water running. And then they can say, the water's here. And then they jump up, get dressed, run outside with their bucket, and all the other neighbors start telling each other, the water's here, the water's here. They all jump up, get dressed, go out with their bucket, and they stand in line. This is not an exaggeration. There are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who live with this kind of situation. Then they line up and they wait to fill up their bucket. And if you've ever carried water, even in your garden, you know how heavy it is. And now imagine carrying all the water that you need for all of your and your family's household needs. So they carry it back to their house. And at their house, they've got barrels that are 200-liter barrels. From those big barrels, they re-dip in to use for their household tasks. And so every task requires making sure that there's enough water. When the barrel has been filled up, then the housewife has to ration it and make sure that it'll last until there is more water coming out of the public faucet, and that's unreliable. So there's a great deal of daily management involved in water usage among the urban poor in the third world. And therefore, and because women do these household jobs, they're at the forefront of understanding not only how to manage the water, but everything about the water in their neighborhood. And the other way of getting water are these water tank trucks. When there aren't even the public faucets, there are tank trucks, big tankers that arrive with water and with big hoses, and they fill up the barrels. But these tank trucks also come very irregularly, sometimes once a week, sometimes twice a week. And the household has to pay for the water, and they pay by liter. And statistics tell us that globally, people who depend on these tank trucks pay 10 times as much for their water as families who have water with a tap or faucet in their home. So it's very expensive. And these are the poorest of the poor. So what you have is among the poorest of the poor, and they're a large proportion of the population, you have women at the forefront of understanding how water is managed in their community. Yet, when it comes time to plan for these communities, when it comes time to think about improving water services, women are not consulted. These women are never consulted. Planning is done by planners. It's done by planners who are city officials, who work for municipal governments. They may be men or women. They're technicians. They're trained in urban planning, or they're trained in hydraulic engineering. And there's a tremendous disconnect between them and the people on the ground. And there is a sense that poor people, especially poor women who stay home and do this work, are ignorant and not worth consulting because they're not trained. They're not trained, so they're not worth consulting. But in fact, they're the repositories of a lot of information. In some parts of the world, not in Latin America, but in Africa, there are certain crops assigned to women and others assigned to men. And so crop farming is gendered. And it has been for a very long time. And men will never farm the crops that are assigned to women in these communities, or vice versa. The crops that they farm use water differently. And the women use water in one way for their crops, and men use it differently because different crops use water differently. That's just the way it is. Now, when planners come in to try to improve water systems, they only talk to the men. And that's problematic. Okay? It's problematic because women are using water. They have different needs for water. Their needs aren't being taken into account, and their experiences in using water aren't being used to enrich the decisions about water management. It doesn't make any sense. If you're going to, especially if you're dealing with the most vulnerable resource and the most vital resource to our survival, you want to bring in as much information as you can, and as many of the skills and experiences that people have with this resource, and then build your responses to the crisis on the most information you can, but that's not what's happening worldwide. What's happening worldwide is that the water field is a very masculine field. It was engineering driven. It's only in the last 10 years that women have even entered the ranks, have studied water engineering, and are actually at the high levels of planning. But even they come out of the engineering schools, and they're not looking at the local level at how women manage water. How do they make themselves visible? Well, the way they make themselves visible is to cause disruption. And that's what protest is about. Protest is about causing disruption to try to get attention paid to your problem. And so what happened in Monterey when the city of 3 million began to go through a very serious water crisis is that poor women began to disrupt the everyday life of the city. And they did this in multiple ways. In some neighborhoods that were located along important boulevards in the city, the women went out. They were just in high states of distress. This wasn't planned. There were no insurgents among them giving them lessons. They simply got furious of not having water and desperate about the state of their children's health. And they said, let's go out and block this boulevard. And they went out to a major street, and they put out tubs in front of them, and they linked arms, and they stopped the traffic. And it took about 20 minutes before this was a huge mess, because traffic in either direction was stopped and backed up, and then the news channels found out, and the police found out, and the mayor found out, and the water authority found out. And what did these women want? They just wanted water. They were willing to go away and go back to their neighborhoods if a tank truck would arrive and deliver water to them. And if they got some assurance that this would happen regularly and they wouldn't have to go back out and protest, but they were willing to go back out. That was one way. Some neighborhoods aren't conveniently located near any important street. And the women in these neighborhoods had a bright idea because, by luck, one group of women, when they were about to blow up, happened to see passing by a maintenance truck from the water authority. And so they kidnapped it. And they took it, they surrounded it, and they took the driver. And then he had like a mobile phone, and they called into the water authority and said, we have your truck, we have your driver, and we're not releasing them until you give us water. And so that was reported in the newspapers, and then other neighborhoods started doing the same thing. So these were kidnappings. But actually, the water truck drivers also came from poor neighborhoods, and they weren't at all upset about this because it was kind of time off, you know. They could hang out in this neighborhood, and they were very sympathetic with the women because their wives were going through the same problems in their neighborhoods. So it wasn't an ugly scene, but it was a good strategy. It got a lot of attention, and it got them water. Other women took their laundry down to the main fountain in front of the governor's palace, and they did all their laundry, and they had stripped their kids naked and put them in the fountain and washed them. And then when they were asked, what are you doing? They said, well, there's water here, and we don't have water. So we're going to take care of our business here. And so these are all things that poor women thought of spontaneously on their own to try to cause disruption, to try to become visible.